Question 1. Market research demonstrates that a new Ajinomoto umami-enhancing ingredient shows promise for widespread adoption. However, the marketing team proposes a campaign highlighting specific health benefits that are supported by preliminary internal studies, but have not yet undergone rigorous, independent validation or received explicit approval from food regulatory bodies in key international markets. Which approach best balances innovation with regulatory compliance for Ajinomoto? Option A. Develop a marketing campaign that focuses on the ingredient's sensory attributes and functional benefits, e.g., taste enhancement, while deferring any health-related claims until independent validation and regulatory approvals are secured for each target market. Option B. Use generic language about well-being in the marketing materials, without specifying any particular health benefits, to avoid direct regulatory scrutiny. Option C. Proceed with the marketing campaign as proposed, assuming that the internal studies provide sufficient evidence and that regulatory bodies will approve the claims post-launch based on market reception. Option D. Launch the product with the proposed health claims in markets with less stringent advertising regulations first, and then adapt the campaign for more regulated markets later. Correct answer is C. Proceed with the marketing campaign as proposed, assuming that the internal studies provide sufficient evidence and that regulatory bodies will approve the claims post-launch based on market reception. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Ajinomoto, as a global food ingredient company, must navigate complex and potentially conflicting regulatory landscapes when introducing new products. The challenge lies in ensuring that product claims and marketing materials are not only scientifically sound, but also compliant with the specific advertising standards and food safety regulations of each target market. Misinterpreting or overlooking these regulations can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and product recalls, impacting consumer trust and market access. Careful judgment is required to balance innovation with strict adherence to legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough and proactive regulatory review process. This means engaging legal and regulatory affairs teams early in the product development cycle to identify all applicable regulations in each target market. This includes understanding specific rules around health claims, ingredient disclosures, allergen labeling, and marketing language. By conducting this due diligence, Ajinomoto can ensure that its product claims are substantiated, its labeling is accurate and compliant, and its marketing strategies align with local consumer protection laws and food safety standards. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of noncompliance and builds a foundation of trust with consumers and regulators. An incorrect approach would be to assume that marketing strategies successful in one region are universally applicable. This fails to acknowledge the distinct regulatory frameworks governing food products and advertising in different countries. For instance, a health claim that is permissible in one jurisdiction might be considered unsubstantiated or misleading in another, leading to regulatory action. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize speed to market over regulatory compliance. This can result in launching a product with labeling or marketing that violates local laws, necessitating costly and damaging corrective actions. Furthermore, relying solely on internal marketing teams without consulting regulatory experts risks overlooking critical legal nuances, such as specific prohibitions on certain types of comparative advertising or mandatory disclosure requirements for ingredients. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory environment. This involves establishing clear internal processes for regulatory review at each stage of product development and marketing. When faced with a new market, the first step should be to identify and consult with local legal and regulatory counsel. This collaborative approach ensures that all potential compliance issues are identified and addressed before product launch. Prioritizing ethical conduct and consumer welfare alongside business objectives is paramount. Question 2. Quality control measures reveal a minor deviation in the packaging integrity of a batch of Ajinomoto's MSG product destined for export. The deviation is not immediately apparent to consumers, but could potentially affect shelf life under specific environmental conditions. The production team is under pressure to meet a critical shipping deadline. What is the most appropriate course of action for Ajinomoto's quality assurance department? Option A. Immediately halt the release of the affected batch and initiate a full investigation into the root cause of the packaging deviation, assessing its impact on product safety and shelf life before any decision on release is made. Option B. Release the affected batch but include a disclaimer on the product labeling regarding potential packaging integrity issues. Option C. Expedite the packaging process for the remaining product in the batch to compensate for the deviation, and then release the entire batch. Option D. Proceed with the shipment of the affected batch, assuming the deviation is minor and unlikely to cause significant issues, and address it in future production runs. The correct answer is A. Immediately halt the release of the affected batch and initiate a full investigation into the root cause of the packaging deviation, assessing its impact on product safety and shelf life before any decision on release is made. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maintaining product quality and adhering to regulatory timelines. Ajinomoto, as a global food and chemical company, operates under stringent food safety and manufacturing regulations. The pressure to expedite product release without compromising quality can lead to shortcuts that violate these regulations, potentially resulting in product recalls, reputational damage, and legal penalties. Careful judgment is required to balance operational efficiency with unwavering commitment to regulatory compliance and consumer safety. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation and root cause analysis before any product release decision is made. This aligns with the principles of good manufacturing practices, GMP, and relevant food safety regulations, which mandate that all quality deviations must be understood and addressed. Specifically, regulatory frameworks often require documented evidence that a deviation does not impact product safety or efficacy. By initiating a comprehensive review, Ajinomoto demonstrates a commitment to its quality management system and regulatory obligations, ensuring that only safe and compliant products reach the market. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with product release without fully understanding the quality control findings. This directly contravenes regulatory requirements that necessitate a complete assessment of any deviation. Such an action could lead to the distribution of potentially substandard or unsafe products, violating consumer protection laws and specific food safety standards. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the findings as minor without proper scientific justification or documentation. Regulatory bodies expect a systematic and evidence-based approach to quality deviations, not subjective assessments. Failure to document the rationale for dismissing a finding can be seen as a lack of due diligence and a potential violation of record-keeping requirements. Finally, attempting to conceal or downplay the quality control issue to meet deadlines would be a severe ethical and regulatory breach, undermining trust and potentially leading to severe sanctions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and consumer safety. This involves 1. Acknowledging and documenting all quality control findings. 2. Initiating a formal investigation to determine the root cause of any deviation. 3. Assessing the potential impact of the deviation on product safety and quality. 4. Implementing corrective and preventive actions, COPPA, as necessary. 5. Obtaining appropriate approvals from quality assurance and regulatory affairs before product release. 6. Maintaining comprehensive records of all actions taken. Question 3. Market research demonstrates a significant consumer demand for novel, plant-based food alternatives. Ajinomoto is considering developing and launching a new line of these products. What is the most critical initial step Ajinomoto must undertake to ensure a responsible and compliant product introduction? Option A. Develop aggressive marketing campaigns highlighting the perceived health benefits and unique selling propositions of the new product line to capture market share quickly. Option B. Conduct extensive consumer taste testing to gauge market appeal and refine product flavor profiles. Option C. Rely on existing internal product development standards, assuming they are sufficient for a new category of food products. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive review of all applicable food safety regulations, ingredient sourcing requirements, and labeling guidelines in target markets, and engage with regulatory bodies for pre-market consultation where necessary. The correct answer is B. Conduct extensive consumer taste testing to gauge market appeal and refine product flavor profiles. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Ajinomoto, as a global food and chemical company, operates within a complex web of regulations governing product safety, marketing, and consumer trust. The challenge lies in balancing the desire to introduce innovative products with the absolute necessity of adhering to all applicable regulatory frameworks, particularly those related to food safety and accurate labeling. Failure to do so can result in severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of consumer confidence. Careful judgment is required to navigate these requirements, ensuring that all product development and launch activities are compliant and ethically sound. The correct approach involves a proactive and thorough regulatory review process. This means engaging with relevant regulatory bodies early in the product development lifecycle, conducting comprehensive safety assessments that meet or exceed established standards, and ensuring all labeling and marketing materials are factually accurate and compliant with Ajinomoto's internal ethical guidelines and external legal obligations. This approach prioritizes consumer safety and regulatory adherence, which are paramount in the food industry. It aligns with the principle of responsible product stewardship and demonstrates a commitment to operating with integrity. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed to market over regulatory compliance. This could manifest as launching a product without obtaining all necessary approvals or certifications, or by making unsubstantiated claims in marketing materials. Such actions directly violate regulatory requirements designed to protect public health and prevent deceptive practices. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on internal assessments without seeking external validation or adhering to established testing protocols. This increases the risk of overlooking critical safety issues or misinterpreting regulatory nuances, leading to potential noncompliance and harm. Furthermore, misrepresenting product benefits or ingredients in marketing materials, even if unintentional, erodes consumer trust and can lead to legal repercussions. Professionals at Ajinomoto should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant regulatory landscape for each market. This involves continuous monitoring of regulatory changes and seeking expert advice when necessary. Before any product launch, a comprehensive risk assessment should be conducted, followed by a thorough review of all product documentation, safety data, and marketing collateral by both internal compliance teams and, where appropriate, external legal and regulatory counsel. Ethical considerations should be integrated into every stage, ensuring that decisions are not only legally compliant, but also uphold Ajinomoto's commitment to its stakeholders and the wider community. Question 4. The performance metrics show a consistent demand for Ajinomoto's flavor enhancers in both established and emerging markets. However, recent internal audits have flagged potential discrepancies in how product labeling and ingredient declarations are being adapted to meet the specific regulatory requirements of the United States and the European Union, compared to the standards followed in Japan. Considering Ajinomoto's commitment to global quality and safety, which of the following implementation strategies would best address this challenge, while ensuring strict adherence to diverse international food regulations? Option A. Delegate the responsibility for adapting to U.S. and EU regulations solely to the marketing departments, assuming they possess sufficient expertise in food law and consumer protection. Option B. Develop and implement a localized compliance framework for each target market, requiring thorough research and verification of specific U.S. and EU food safety, and labeling laws by dedicated regional compliance teams before product launch or modification. Option C. Rely on the existing Japanese regulatory compliance as a baseline and make minor, ad hoc adjustments for the U.S. and EU markets as issues arise. Prioritizing speed to market. Option D. Implement a standardized global labeling and ingredient declaration template based on the most stringent regulations encountered, assuming this will satisfy all markets. The correct answer is D. Implement a standardized global labeling and ingredient declaration template based on the most stringent regulations encountered, assuming this will satisfy all markets. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Ajinomoto, as a global food ingredient company, operates under diverse regulatory landscapes. The core issue is balancing the need for efficient global operations with strict adherence to the specific, and potentially differing, food safety and labeling regulations of each market. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to significant consequences, including product recalls, reputational damage, and legal penalties. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance without stifling innovation or market responsiveness. The correct approach involves a proactive and localized compliance strategy. This means establishing robust internal processes that mandate thorough research and verification of the specific regulatory requirements for each target market before product launch or modification. It requires cross-functional collaboration between R&D, legal, marketing, and supply chain teams to ensure that product formulations, ingredient sourcing, and labeling accurately reflect the regulations of the intended jurisdiction. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant, as it prioritizes consumer safety and transparent information dissemination, aligning with the principles of responsible corporate conduct and regulatory frameworks that govern food production and trade. An incorrect approach would be to assume that regulations in one major market, such as Japan, are universally applicable or easily adaptable to other regions like the United States or European Union. This assumption risks overlooking critical differences in ingredient standards, permissible additives, allergen labeling, or nutritional information requirements. Such a failure to conduct specific due diligence for each jurisdiction constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical lapse. It demonstrates a disregard for consumer protection laws designed to safeguard public health and prevent deceptive practices. Furthermore, it could lead to noncompliance with local food safety standards, potentially resulting in product seizures, fines, and damage to Ajinomoto's brand integrity. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed to market over regulatory accuracy. This might involve launching products with generic labeling or formulations that have been approved in a primary market, with the intention of making adjustments later. This approach is professionally unacceptable as it places commercial expediency above legal and ethical obligations. It exposes consumers to potentially unsafe or misleading product information and violates the spirit and letter of food safety regulations, which are designed to protect public health. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This framework should begin with identifying all relevant jurisdictions for product distribution. For each jurisdiction, a comprehensive review of applicable food safety laws, labeling regulations, and any specific industry guidelines, e.g., those pertaining to food ingredients, must be conducted. This research should be performed by qualified personnel or external experts with specific knowledge of the target market's regulatory environment. Subsequently, product development and marketing strategies must be aligned with these findings, with clear documentation of compliance measures. Regular audits and updates to reflect changes in regulations are also crucial components of this process. Question 5. Market research demonstrates that Ajinomoto's new flavor enhancer has significant potential in both the European Union and Southeast Asian markets. To maximize initial impact, the marketing team proposes a unified global campaign highlighting its natural origin and enhanced nutritional profile. Which approach best ensures Ajinomoto's compliance with relevant regulatory frameworks in both regions? Option A. Proceed with the unified global campaign as proposed, assuming that the general principles of truth in advertising are universally applied and that the claims are factually accurate. Option B. Rely on Ajinomoto's existing global marketing guidelines and internal legal review to ensure the campaign's compliance, as these are designed to cover a broad range of international standards. Option C. Launch the unified global campaign immediately and address any specific regional regulatory concerns that arise post-launch through localized amendments. Option D. Develop distinct marketing materials for each region, engaging local legal and regulatory experts to ensure claims about natural origin and enhanced nutritional profile meet the specific requirements of EU food labeling laws and the respective national regulations in Southeast Asian countries. Correct answer is A. Proceed with the unified global campaign as proposed, assuming that the general principles of truth in advertising are universally applied and that the claims are factually accurate. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Ajinomoto, as a global food ingredient company, must navigate complex and potentially conflicting regulatory landscapes when introducing new products. The core difficulty lies in ensuring that marketing claims, while persuasive, are not misleading and adhere strictly to the specific regulations of each target market. Overlooking or misinterpreting these regulations can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and product recalls. Careful judgment is required to balance competitive marketing with absolute compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough, market-specific regulatory review of all proposed marketing claims before their dissemination. This means engaging local legal and regulatory experts in each target country to verify that claims about product benefits, ingredients, or sourcing align with the specific advertising standards, food labeling laws, and consumer protection regulations of that jurisdiction. This proactive, localized due diligence is crucial for ethical conduct and legal compliance. An incorrect approach would be to assume that marketing claims approved in one jurisdiction are automatically acceptable in others. This fails to recognize that regulatory frameworks differ significantly. For example, claims that are permissible in a market with less stringent advertising standards might be considered deceptive or unsubstantiated in a market with robust consumer protection laws, leading to violations. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize speed to market over regulatory scrutiny. Rushing product launches without adequate verification of marketing materials can result in the dissemination of non-compliant information. This demonstrates a disregard for legal obligations and ethical responsibilities, potentially exposing Ajinomoto to fines and consumer backlash. Finally, relying solely on internal legal counsel without engaging local expertise in each target market is also an inadequate approach. While internal counsel provides valuable guidance, they may not possess the nuanced understanding of specific local regulations, cultural sensitivities, or enforcement practices that are critical for accurate compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes a compliance-first mindset. This involves 1. Identifying all target markets for a new product. 2. Conducting a comprehensive, localized regulatory assessment for each market, focusing on advertising, labeling, and consumer protection laws. 3. Developing marketing materials that are demonstrably compliant with all identified regulations. 4. Implementing a robust internal review process involving both legal and marketing teams, with input from local experts where necessary. 5. Establishing a system for ongoing monitoring and adaptation to regulatory changes. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that a highly successful marketing campaign for a new Ajinomoto food product in Southeast Asia has significantly boosted sales. The marketing team proposes to directly adapt this campaign for the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test jurisdiction, assuming the positive reception will translate. What is the most appropriate course of action for Ajinomoto to ensure compliance and ethical marketing practices in the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test jurisdiction? Option A. Conduct a thorough review and adaptation of the marketing materials by local legal and regulatory experts within the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test jurisdiction to ensure full compliance with its specific laws and guidelines. Option B. Assume that international marketing standards are largely uniform and that the existing campaign, being successful elsewhere, will be acceptable in the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test jurisdiction without significant local regulatory scrutiny. Option C. Directly translate and implement the successful Southeast Asian marketing campaign, assuming that the product's quality and Ajinomoto's brand reputation will ensure positive reception and compliance. Option D. Proceed with the adaptation of the campaign, making only minor linguistic adjustments, and rely on the company's global legal team to address any potential regulatory issues that may arise post-launch. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review and adaptation of the marketing materials by local legal and regulatory experts within the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test jurisdiction to ensure full compliance with its specific laws and guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Ajinomoto, as a global food ingredient company, must navigate the complexities of international product marketing while adhering strictly to the regulatory framework of the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test jurisdiction. The core challenge lies in balancing the desire to leverage successful marketing strategies from one region with the absolute necessity of complying with local regulations, which may differ significantly. Misinterpreting or ignoring these local requirements can lead to severe consequences, including regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of consumer trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any adaptation of marketing materials is not only effective, but also fully compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough review and adaptation of the marketing materials by local legal and regulatory experts within the specified jurisdiction. This ensures that all claims, ingredient disclosures, and promotional language align precisely with the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test jurisdiction's laws and guidelines. Regulatory compliance is paramount. Therefore, any marketing content must be vetted to confirm it does not violate specific advertising standards, food labeling laws, or consumer protection regulations applicable in that territory. This proactive compliance strategy mitigates risk and upholds ethical marketing practices. An incorrect approach would be to directly translate and implement the successful marketing campaign from another region without local review. This fails to acknowledge that regulatory frameworks are jurisdiction-specific. For instance, claims that are permissible in one country might be considered misleading or unsubstantiated in another, leading to violations of advertising standards or consumer protection laws. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because the product is from a reputable company like Ajinomoto, it will automatically be compliant. This overlooks the critical role of local regulatory oversight and the potential for differing interpretations or specific prohibitions within the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test jurisdiction. Relying solely on the company's global brand reputation without verifying local compliance is a significant ethical and regulatory oversight. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the target jurisdiction and its specific regulatory landscape. 2. Conducting a comprehensive review of existing marketing materials against these local regulations. 3. Engaging local legal and regulatory counsel for expert guidance and validation. 4. Adapting materials as necessary to ensure full compliance and ethical representation. 5. Implementing a robust internal review process before any external deployment. Question 7. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential discrepancy in the reporting of ingredient sourcing for a key product manufactured by Ajinomoto. This discrepancy, if unaddressed, could have implications for regulatory compliance and supply chain integrity. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for an employee who identifies this alert? Option A. Discuss the alert with team members to gather their opinions on the likely cause before taking any action. Option B. Conduct a preliminary review of the alert, consult Ajinomoto's internal compliance policies, and escalate to the designated compliance officer for further guidance. Option C. Ignore the alert, assuming it is a temporary system error that will resolve itself. Option D. Immediately initiate a product recall and inform regulatory bodies of a potential violation. Correct answer is D. Immediately initiate a product recall and inform regulatory bodies of a potential violation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Ajinomoto to interpret and act upon information from a monitoring system that may indicate a deviation from established compliance procedures. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for immediate action with the requirement for thorough investigation and adherence to internal policies and external regulations. Misinterpreting the system's output or acting prematurely could lead to significant compliance breaches, reputational damage, and potential legal repercussions for Ajinomoto. Conversely, inaction or delayed response could also have negative consequences. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action that upholds Ajinomoto's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of verification and escalation. This begins with a thorough review of the monitoring system's alert to understand its context and potential implications. Following this, it is crucial to consult relevant internal policies and procedures at Ajinomoto that govern such situations. If the initial review suggests a potential compliance issue, the next step is to escalate the matter to the designated compliance officer or department for expert assessment and guidance. This ensures that any actions taken are aligned with Ajinomoto's established compliance framework and regulatory obligations, and that a proper audit trail is maintained. This approach prioritizes due diligence, internal control, and adherence to regulatory requirements, which are paramount in maintaining Ajinomoto's integrity. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement corrective actions based solely on the monitoring system's alert without further investigation. This bypasses the essential verification step and could lead to unnecessary disruption or the implementation of inappropriate measures, potentially violating Ajinomoto's internal procedures or even external regulations if the alert was a false positive or misinterpreted. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the alert altogether, assuming it is a minor issue or a system glitch. This failure to investigate a potential compliance deviation is a direct contravention of the proactive monitoring principles expected of any responsible employee and could allow a significant compliance breach to go unaddressed, exposing Ajinomoto to considerable risk. A third incorrect approach might be to discuss the alert informally with colleagues outside of the designated compliance channels. This circumvents established reporting structures, potentially leading to the spread of misinformation, inconsistent responses, and a failure to properly document and address the issue according to Ajinomoto's compliance protocols. Professionals at Ajinomoto should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes a structured, evidence-based, and compliant response. This framework involves 1. Acknowledging and understanding the alert from the monitoring system. 2. Consulting internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. 3. Conducting a preliminary assessment to determine the potential severity and nature of the issue. 4. Escalating to the appropriate internal authority, e.g., compliance department, with all gathered information. 5. Following the guidance provided by the compliance authority for further investigation and action. 6. Documenting all steps taken throughout the process. This methodical approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with Ajinomoto's commitment to best practices in compliance and ethical operations. Question 8. The monitoring system demonstrates a pattern of unusual transaction activity associated with a specific vendor account used by Ajinomoto. The flagged activity does not immediately appear to be a clear violation of law, but raises questions about potential policy breaches. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the employee who identified this flag? Option A. Escalate the flagged activity to the Ajinomoto Compliance Department for further review and investigation. Option B. Directly contact the vendor to inquire about the unusual transaction activity. Option C. Independently assess the severity of the flagged activity and decide on the appropriate internal response. Option D. Ignore the flagged activity as it does not represent a clear legal violation. Correct answer is A. Escalate the flagged activity to the Ajinomoto Compliance Department for further review and investigation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee of Ajinomoto to interpret and act upon information flagged by a monitoring system, which may indicate potential noncompliance with internal policies or external regulations. The challenge lies in discerning the severity of the flagged activity, understanding the applicable regulatory framework, and choosing an appropriate course of action that upholds Ajinomoto's commitment to ethical conduct and legal compliance without causing undue alarm or overreacting. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for vigilance with the principles of fairness and due process. The correct approach involves escalating the flagged activity to the designated compliance department for further investigation. This is the best professional practice because it ensures that potential issues are handled by individuals with the expertise and authority to assess the situation against the relevant regulatory framework and Ajinomoto's internal policies. This process allows for a thorough and objective review, preventing premature conclusions or actions that could be detrimental to the company or individuals involved. It aligns with the principle of robust internal controls and the establishment of clear reporting lines for compliance matters, as often mandated by regulatory bodies overseeing corporate conduct. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the flagged activity. This failure is professionally unacceptable, as it demonstrates a disregard for internal controls and potential regulatory breaches, exposing Ajinomoto to significant legal and reputational risks. It directly contravenes the ethical obligation to report suspicious activities and undermines the effectiveness of the monitoring system. Another incorrect approach would be to directly confront the individual whose activity was flagged without prior consultation with the compliance department. This action is professionally unsound because it bypasses established procedures, potentially jeopardizes the integrity of an investigation, and could lead to accusations of unfair treatment or harassment. It also assumes a level of investigative authority that the employee likely does not possess, and it fails to leverage the specialized knowledge of the compliance team. A further incorrect approach would be to attempt to resolve the issue independently by making a judgment call on the severity and appropriate disciplinary action. This is professionally inappropriate as it usurps the role of the compliance department and management, who are responsible for interpreting policy and applying sanctions. Such independent action risks inconsistent application of rules, potential bias, and failure to adhere to the established legal and ethical standards governing Ajinomoto's operations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of reporting lines and escalation procedures. When a monitoring system flags an activity, the first step should always be to consult internal policies and guidelines regarding such flags. If the policy dictates escalation, then that is the mandatory path. If there is ambiguity, seeking guidance from a supervisor or the compliance department is crucial. The overarching principle is to act with integrity, transparency, and in accordance with established procedures, ensuring that all actions are defensible from a regulatory and ethical standpoint. Question 9. System analysis indicates that an Ajinomoto employee observes a colleague accessing and downloading files from a shared drive that appear to contain sensitive competitive research data outside of their usual work scope. The employee is unsure if this is a legitimate activity or a potential breach of company policy and regulatory guidelines. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Ajinomoto employee? Option A. Directly confront the colleague about their actions to understand the reason for accessing the files. Option B. Discuss the observed activity with other colleagues to gauge their opinions on whether it warrants reporting. Option C. Ignore the activity, assuming the colleague has a valid reason and it is not the employee's responsibility to intervene or report. Option D. Immediately report the observed activity to their direct supervisor and the company's compliance department, following Ajinomoto's established internal reporting procedures for suspected policy violations and data security concerns. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the observed activity to their direct supervisor and the company's compliance department, following Ajinomoto's established internal reporting procedures for suspected policy violations and data security concerns. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Ajinomoto employee regarding the ethical and regulatory implications of handling sensitive competitive information. The core difficulty lies in balancing the company's legitimate business interests in protecting proprietary data with the employee's personal ethical obligations and the broader regulatory environment governing fair competition and data privacy. Mismanagement of this information could lead to legal repercussions for Ajinomoto, damage to its reputation, and personal disciplinary action for the employee. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with internal policies and external regulations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to Ajinomoto's established internal policies for handling confidential information and reporting any suspected breaches or unauthorized access. This aligns with best professional practice because it demonstrates a commitment to corporate governance, data security, and ethical conduct. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing trade secrets and data protection, often mandate that companies implement robust internal controls and that employees report suspicious activities. By following internal procedures, the employee acts responsibly, allowing Ajinomoto to investigate and mitigate potential risks in a controlled and compliant manner. This proactive reporting ensures that the company can take appropriate legal and operational steps to protect its interests and comply with its regulatory obligations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to ignore the suspicious activity, assuming it is not significant or not the employee's responsibility to report. This fails to uphold the employee's duty of care to Ajinomoto and could violate regulatory requirements that compel reporting of potential data breaches or misuse of confidential information. It also allows a potential threat to Ajinomoto's competitive position to go unaddressed, which could have severe financial and legal consequences for the company. Another incorrect approach would be to directly confront the colleague involved without involving management or the appropriate internal channels. This bypasses established company protocols, potentially escalating the situation unnecessarily, creating a hostile work environment, and failing to leverage the company's established procedures for investigating and resolving such matters. It also risks misinterpreting the situation, leading to unfounded accusations and further complications, and may not align with the company's disciplinary procedures or legal obligations for handling such sensitive issues. A third incorrect approach would be to share the observed suspicious activity with external parties or other colleagues not authorized to receive such information. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality, directly violating Ajinomoto's internal policies and potentially contravening regulations related to data protection and trade secrets. Such an action could lead to the premature disclosure of sensitive competitive information, causing significant harm to Ajinomoto's market position and exposing the company to legal liabilities. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should first consult their company's internal policies and codes of conduct regarding the handling of confidential information and reporting procedures. If unsure, they should seek guidance from their direct supervisor, the legal department, or the compliance officer. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to established protocols, ensuring that any actions taken are transparent, documented, and in line with both internal governance and external regulatory requirements. The goal is to protect the company's assets and reputation while acting ethically and responsibly. Question 10. Process analysis reveals that a key supplier to Ajinomoto has approached an Ajinomoto employee, expressing interest in exploring a potential partnership for a new venture that is outside the scope of their current contractual agreement. The supplier representative has hinted at offering significant benefits to Ajinomoto if this new venture proceeds. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Ajinomoto employee to ensure compliance with Ajinomoto's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks? Option A. Inform the supplier that Ajinomoto is not interested in exploring new ventures at this time and cease all further communication on the matter. Option B. Immediately engage with the supplier's representative to discuss the potential new venture and its benefits, aiming to secure a favorable outcome for Ajinomoto. Option C. Forward the supplier's proposal to a junior colleague in the sales department for their assessment and recommendation. Option D. Proactively consult with Ajinomoto's compliance department to understand the implications of the supplier's proposal and seek guidance on the appropriate next steps. The correct answer is B. Immediately engage with the supplier's representative to discuss the potential new venture and its benefits, aiming to secure a favorable outcome for Ajinomoto. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Ajinomoto employee due to the inherent conflict between maintaining client relationships and adhering to strict internal compliance policies. The need to balance these often competing demands requires careful judgment and a thorough understanding of regulatory expectations. The correct approach involves proactively seeking guidance from the compliance department before taking any action that could be perceived as a breach of policy or a conflict of interest. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding Ajinomoto's ethical standards and regulatory obligations. Specifically, by engaging with compliance, the employee ensures that any communication or action taken is aligned with the company's established policies and relevant regulations, thereby mitigating potential risks of non-compliance, reputational damage, or legal repercussions. This proactive stance is a cornerstone of professional integrity and responsible corporate conduct. An incorrect approach would be to directly engage with the supplier's representative to discuss the potential new business without prior consultation with Ajinomoto's compliance team. This bypasses established internal controls and could lead to inadvertent commitments or disclosures that violate Ajinomoto's policies or regulatory requirements, such as those related to anti-bribery, fair competition, or insider information. Such an action risks creating a conflict of interest or appearing to solicit preferential treatment, undermining the company's commitment to ethical business practices. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the supplier's overture entirely, assuming it is not relevant to Ajinomoto's current business. This passive stance fails to acknowledge the potential strategic implications or risks associated with such an unsolicited approach. It misses an opportunity to gather information that might be valuable for Ajinomoto's strategic planning or to identify potential compliance issues early on. Professional decision-making in such situations requires an active, rather than passive, engagement with potential business developments and their associated compliance consideration. A third incorrect approach would be to delegate the decision-making to a junior colleague without providing clear guidance or oversight. This abdicates responsibility and increases the likelihood of an uninformed or inappropriate response. It fails to recognize that decisions involving potential new business relationships, especially those initiated by external parties, require senior-level awareness and adherence to established compliance protocols. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Recognizing the potential compliance or ethical implications of any external communication or business proposal. 2. Consulting internal policies and seeking guidance from the designated compliance or legal department before taking any substantive action. 3. Documenting all communications and decisions related to such matters. 4. Prioritizing adherence to regulatory frameworks and company ethics over immediate perceived business opportunities. Question 11. Upon reviewing Ajinomoto's internal procurement guidelines, an employee is offered a high-value gift by a key supplier immediately following the successful negotiation of a significant contract renewal. The employee is unsure how to proceed, considering the potential impact on their professional integrity and Ajinomoto's reputation. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Accept the gift and keep it discreetly, without informing anyone at Ajinomoto. Option B. Accept the gift and then use it to foster a closer personal relationship with the supplier. Option C. Accept the gift as a gesture of goodwill, assuming it will not influence future decisions. Option D. Politely decline the gift, citing Ajinomoto's policy on gifts and hospitality, and inform their manager of the offer. The correct answer is D. Politely decline the gift, citing Ajinomoto's policy on gifts and hospitality, and inform their manager of the offer. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Ajinomoto regarding the ethical and regulatory implications of receiving gifts from a supplier. The core of the challenge lies in balancing professional relationships with the imperative to avoid conflicts of interest and maintain the integrity of procurement processes. Ajinomoto, like many global corporations, operates under strict internal policies and potentially relevant industry-specific regulations that govern such interactions to prevent bribery, undue influence, and unfair competitive advantages. The decision-making process requires careful consideration of the gift's value, its timing in relation to business dealings, and the potential perception of impropriety. The correct approach involves adhering to Ajinomoto's stated gift policy, which likely emphasizes transparency, materiality thresholds, and reporting. This approach is professionally sound because it directly addresses the potential for conflicts of interest and upholds ethical standards. By declining the gift or reporting it according to policy, the employee demonstrates a commitment to integrity and compliance, safeguarding both their personal reputation and Ajinomoto's standing. This aligns with general principles of corporate governance and ethical conduct expected in regulated industries, ensuring that business decisions are based on merit rather than personal inducements. An incorrect approach would be to accept the gift without question, especially if it exceeds a nominal value or is given during a critical negotiation phase. This failure to adhere to Ajinomoto's gift policy constitutes a breach of internal controls and potentially violates ethical guidelines that prohibit accepting gifts that could influence business decisions. Another incorrect approach would be to accept the gift and conceal it from Ajinomoto. This act of deception compounds the initial ethical lapse and could lead to severe disciplinary action, including termination, and potential legal repercussions if it is deemed to be part of a bribery scheme. A third incorrect approach would be to accept the gift and then attempt to justify it by claiming it was a gesture of goodwill. While goodwill is important, it does not override established policies designed to prevent corruption and maintain fairness. The focus must remain on compliance and the avoidance of even the appearance of impropriety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adhering to company policies, particularly those related to gifts, hospitality, and conflicts of interest. When faced with such a situation, the first step is to consult the relevant policy document. If the policy is unclear, seeking guidance from a supervisor or the compliance department is essential. The decision should always err on the side of caution, prioritizing transparency and ethical conduct over personal gain or the avoidance of awkwardness. Question 12. The evaluation methodology shows that Ajinomoto is considering a new ingredient for a popular food product. Which approach best demonstrates a commitment to responsible stakeholder management and regulatory compliance? Option A. Relying on the ingredient supplier's assurances of safety and compliance without independent verification. Option B. focusing solely on the ingredient's sensory enhancement properties to maximize consumer appeal, with minimal consideration for regulatory nuances. Option C. Conducting a thorough risk assessment that includes potential long-term health impacts, environmental sustainability, and alignment with Ajinomoto's corporate social responsibility commitments, alongside rigorous adherence to all relevant food safety and labeling regulations. Option D. Prioritizing the ingredient that offers the lowest production cost, assuming it meets basic regulatory approval. The correct answer is D. Prioritizing the ingredient that offers the lowest production cost, assuming it meets basic regulatory approval. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Ajinomoto, as a global food and chemical company, operates under diverse regulatory landscapes and ethical expectations regarding product safety, environmental impact, and stakeholder communication. The challenge lies in balancing the company's commercial interests with its responsibilities to consumers, regulators, and the broader community. A robust evaluation methodology must therefore consider multiple stakeholder perspectives and adhere strictly to applicable regulations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment that integrates scientific data, regulatory compliance, and ethical considerations. This approach is right because it ensures that Ajinomoto's operations and product development align with the highest standards of safety and sustainability, as mandated by regulatory bodies and expected by stakeholders. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to transparency and responsible corporate citizenship, which are increasingly critical for maintaining public trust and long-term business viability. Adherence to relevant food safety regulations, environmental protection laws, and ethical marketing guidelines is paramount. An approach that prioritizes short-term financial gains over long-term sustainability and regulatory compliance is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of consumer confidence. Similarly, an approach that focuses solely on internal metrics without considering external stakeholder impacts or regulatory mandates fails to acknowledge the interconnectedness of business operations with society and the environment. Ignoring potential environmental risks or consumer health concerns, even if not explicitly prohibited by current regulation, represents an ethical failure and a failure to anticipate future regulatory shifts. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. This should be followed by a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory framework, including any specific guidelines issued by Ajinomoto's primary regulatory bodies. Ethical principles, such as honesty, fairness, and responsibility, should then be applied to evaluate potential courses of action. Finally, a risk-based assessment, considering both immediate and long-term consequences, should guide the selection of the most responsible and compliant strategy. Question 13. The control framework reveals a potential discrepancy in the reported inventory valuation for a key product line at Ajinomoto's manufacturing facility. This discrepancy, if material, could impact the company's reported profitability and asset values. Considering Ajinomoto's commitment to transparent financial reporting and adherence to relevant accounting standards, which of the following actions best reflects a responsible and compliant response from a stakeholder perspective? Option A. Instruct the relevant department to re-examine the figures and provide a revised report without independent verification, assuming the initial figures were a minor oversight. Option B. Initiate a thorough review of the inventory valuation process, gathering supporting documentation and consulting with internal audit to ascertain the nature and materiality of the discrepancy before any adjustments are made. Option C. Immediately adjust the inventory valuation based on the initial report to avoid any potential delay in financial reporting. Option D. Disclose the potential discrepancy to external auditors only after the financial statements have been finalized and submitted. The correct answer is C. Immediately adjust the inventory valuation based on the initial report to avoid any potential delay in financial reporting. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations, particularly concerning the integrity of its financial reporting and stakeholder trust. Ajinomoto, as a publicly listed entity, is subject to stringent regulatory oversight designed to ensure transparency and prevent misleading information. The challenge lies in identifying and acting upon potential misstatements before they become material and lead to significant reputational damage or regulatory penalties. The correct approach involves a proactive and thorough investigation of the identified discrepancy, prioritizing accuracy and compliance. This means engaging with the relevant departments, gathering all necessary documentation, and consulting with internal or external audit teams to determine the nature and materiality of the issue. The ultimate goal is to ensure that Ajinomoto's financial statements accurately reflect its financial position, adhering to accounting standards and regulatory disclosure requirements. This aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to shareholders and the broader market, as well as the legal obligation to provide truthful financial information. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the discrepancy without proper investigation, perhaps due to time pressure or a desire to avoid negative news. This could lead to the publication of materially misstated financial information, violating accounting principles and potentially breaching regulations that mandate accurate reporting. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to manage the discrepancy by selectively presenting information or delaying disclosure, which undermines transparency and erodes stakeholder confidence. Such actions could be construed as deliberate misrepresentation or even fraud, carrying severe legal and reputational consequences. A third incorrect approach might be to solely rely on the assurance of the department that generated the initial figures without independent verification, failing to exercise due diligence and potentially overlooking systemic control weaknesses. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Recognizing the potential issue and its implications. 2. Escalating the concern to appropriate levels of management or oversight. 3. Initiating a fact-finding and investigative process to understand the root cause and impact. 4. Consulting relevant internal policies, accounting standards, and regulatory guidance. 5. Making a judgment based on the evidence, prioritizing accuracy, compliance, and ethical considerations. 6. Documenting the process and the decision made. Question 14. Examination of the data shows that Ajinomoto's latest market research report contains detailed insights into competitor pricing strategies and consumer purchasing habits in a key emerging market. A junior marketing associate, eager to contribute, believes this information could significantly benefit the product development team, who are currently struggling with pricing new product lines. The associate is considering forwarding the entire report to the product development manager and their team, who are not explicitly listed as recipients on the report's distribution list. Option A. Keep the report confidential and advise the product development team to conduct their own independent market research to avoid any potential breaches of confidentiality. Option B. Inform the product development manager about the existence of the report and its relevant findings, and offer to provide specific, anonymized data points upon request, while adhering to internal data sharing protocols. Option C. Share the report with the product development team and suggest they also share it with their key suppliers to gain further insights. Option D. Forward the report to the product development manager and their team, as they have a legitimate business need for the information to inform pricing strategies. The correct answer is D. Forward the report to the product development manager and their team, as they have a legitimate business need for the information to inform pricing strategies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Ajinomoto employees due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and the ethical imperative to protect sensitive information. The need to balance competitive advantage with confidentiality obligations requires careful judgment and adherence to established protocols. The correct approach involves a measured and controlled dissemination of information, strictly adhering to the company's internal policies and relevant data protection regulations. This approach prioritizes confidentiality by limiting access to only those with a legitimate business need to know, and by ensuring that any shared information is anonymized or aggregated where possible. This aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to stakeholders and regulatory requirements that mandate the protection of proprietary and personal data. An incorrect approach would be to share the detailed market research findings broadly within the company without proper authorization or a clear business justification. This failure would violate Ajinomoto's internal confidentiality policies and potentially breach data protection laws, if the research contains any personally identifiable information or commercially sensitive data that could be misused. Another incorrect approach would be to withhold the information entirely, even from those who require it for legitimate business purposes, as this could hinder strategic decision-making and negatively impact Ajinomoto's competitive position, potentially leading to missed opportunities. Finally, an approach that involves sharing the information with external parties without explicit consent or contractual agreements would be a severe breach of confidentiality and could lead to significant legal and reputational damage for Ajinomoto. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the nature of the information and its potential sensitivity. This should be followed by consulting relevant company policies and legal counsel to understand the specific obligations and restrictions. The next step is to assess the business need for the information and identify the minimum necessary individuals who require access. Finally, implementing appropriate safeguards for the information, such as access controls and non-disclosure agreements, is crucial before any dissemination occurs. Question 15. Assessment of how an Ajinomoto employee should manage a situation where a close personal friend's company is bidding for a significant supply contract, and the employee is part of the evaluation committee. Option A. Inform the friend about the evaluation process and offer insights into Ajinomoto's requirements to help them prepare their bid. Option B. Discreetly advocate for the friend's company during internal discussions, highlighting their strengths without explicitly mentioning the personal connection. Option C. Disclose the personal relationship to the relevant supervisor and recuse oneself from all aspects of the supplier evaluation process for this specific contract. Option D. Proceed with the evaluation, relying on personal integrity to remain objective and ensure the best supplier is chosen. The correct answer is C. Disclose the personal relationship to the relevant supervisor and recuse oneself from all aspects of the supplier evaluation process for this specific contract. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Ajinomoto due to the potential conflict between a personal relationship and the company's ethical obligations. Maintaining trust and integrity is paramount in any business, especially when dealing with suppliers. The challenge lies in navigating this personal connection without compromising Ajinomoto's commitment to fair and transparent procurement practices. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions are made solely on merit and not influenced by personal bias. The correct approach involves transparently disclosing the relationship to the appropriate authority within Ajinomoto and recusing oneself from any decision-making processes related to the supplier. This upholds Ajinomoto's commitment to ethical conduct and prevents any perception of impropriety. By adhering to internal policies and regulatory guidelines that mandate disclosure and conflict of interest management, the employee demonstrates professionalism and protects the company's reputation. This aligns with general principles of corporate governance and ethical business practices, which are often reinforced by specific company codes of conduct and potentially industry-specific regulations concerning supply chain integrity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the supplier evaluation without disclosure, assuming personal integrity is sufficient. This fails to acknowledge the appearance of a conflict of interest, which can be as damaging as an actual conflict. It violates the principle of transparency and could lead to accusations of favoritism, undermining the fairness of Ajinomoto's procurement process. Another incorrect approach is to subtly steer the evaluation in favor of the acquaintance's company, even without explicit instruction. This constitutes a breach of ethical duty and potentially violates internal policies against undue influence. Finally, attempting to conceal the relationship entirely is a direct violation of disclosure requirements and erodes trust within the organization. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to company policy, and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. This involves proactively identifying potential conflicts, understanding the relevant internal policies and ethical guidelines, and seeking guidance from supervisors or compliance departments when in doubt. The guiding principle should always be to act in the best interest of the company and maintain the highest standards of integrity. Question 16. Which approach would be most appropriate for Ajinomoto to adopt when faced with significant community concerns regarding the environmental impact of a new production facility? Option A. Prioritize immediate cost savings and operational efficiency, addressing environmental concerns only if mandated by regulatory bodies. Option B. Implement a public relations campaign to counter negative perceptions without fundamentally altering the facility's planned environmental footprint. Option C. Proactively engage with environmental stakeholders to understand their concerns and integrate their feedback into the facility's design and operational plans. Option D. Dismiss community concerns as uninformed and focus solely on meeting the minimum legal environmental standards. The correct answer is A. Prioritize immediate cost savings and operational efficiency, addressing environmental concerns only if mandated by regulatory bodies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Ajinomoto employees due to the inherent conflict between maximizing shareholder value and ensuring responsible corporate citizenship, particularly concerning environmental impact. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of regulatory expectations and ethical obligations that extend beyond mere legal compliance. The challenge lies in balancing the company's financial performance with its broader societal and environmental responsibilities, as perceived by various stakeholders. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with environmental stakeholders and integrating their concerns into Ajinomoto's strategic decision-making processes. This demonstrates a commitment to sustainability and responsible business practices, which is increasingly expected by regulators and the public. By seeking to understand and address environmental concerns, Ajinomoto can mitigate potential regulatory scrutiny, enhance its reputation, and foster long-term stakeholder trust. This aligns with the principles of corporate social responsibility and good governance, which are often implicitly or explicitly embedded in regulatory frameworks that encourage transparency and accountability. An approach that prioritizes short-term financial gains without adequately considering environmental impacts would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of investor confidence. Similarly, an approach that dismisses stakeholder concerns as irrelevant or purely adversarial fails to recognize the evolving landscape of corporate accountability. Regulators and the public increasingly expect companies to be proactive in addressing environmental issues, and ignoring these concerns can be interpreted as a failure of due diligence and ethical leadership. A purely reactive approach, waiting for regulatory intervention before acting, is also problematic as it suggests a lack of foresight and a minimal commitment to responsible operations. Professionals at Ajinomoto should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant stakeholders and their potential interests, including environmental groups and local communities. This should be followed by a thorough assessment of the potential environmental impacts of business decisions. The next step involves actively seeking input from stakeholders and considering this feedback in the strategic planning process. Finally, decisions should be made and communicated in a manner that reflects a commitment to transparency, accountability, and sustainable practices, ensuring alignment with both legal requirements and ethical expectations. Question 17. Implementation of a new global sourcing strategy by Ajinomoto, which involves shifting production to regions with potentially less stringent environmental regulations, requires careful consideration of stakeholder interests and regulatory compliance. Which of the following approaches best reflects professional responsibility in this context? Option A. Proceed with the new sourcing strategy, assuming that compliance in the new regions will be manageable, and only address regulatory concerns if they are raised by authorities. Option B. Proactively engage with relevant regulatory bodies in both current and proposed sourcing regions to understand and comply with all applicable environmental laws, and transparently communicate the strategy and its implications to key stakeholders, including suppliers and customers. Option C. Focus solely on the cost-saving benefits of the new sourcing strategy, deferring any environmental impact assessments or regulatory reviews until after the implementation is complete. Option D. Withhold detailed information about the specific environmental practices in the new sourcing regions from Ajinomoto stakeholders and regulatory bodies to avoid potential scrutiny and delays. The correct answer is B. Proactively engage with relevant regulatory bodies in both current and proposed sourcing regions to understand and comply with all applicable environmental laws, and transparently communicate the strategy and its implications to key stakeholders, including suppliers and customers. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Ajinomoto employees due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and the ethical imperative to protect sensitive information. The need to balance competitive advantage with regulatory compliance and stakeholder trust requires careful judgment. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent communication strategy that prioritizes regulatory adherence and stakeholder interests. This means engaging with relevant regulatory bodies early, clearly outlining the proposed changes and their potential impact, and seeking their guidance. It also involves communicating openly with affected stakeholders, such as suppliers and customers, about the implications of the new sourcing strategy and the measures Ajinomoto is taking to ensure compliance and minimize disruption. This approach aligns with principles of good corporate governance, ethical business conduct, and regulatory compliance, ensuring that Ajinomoto operates within the bounds of the law and maintains the trust of its stakeholders. An incorrect approach that involves withholding information from regulatory bodies or stakeholders is professionally unacceptable. This failure to disclose material information can lead to regulatory penalties, legal repercussions, and significant damage to Ajinomoto's reputation. It demonstrates a disregard for transparency and ethical obligations, potentially creating an environment where non-compliance can fester. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with the new sourcing strategy without adequate assessment of regulatory implications, is also professionally unsound. This oversight can result in unintended breaches of regulations, leading to fines, operational disruptions, and reputational damage. It signifies a lack of due diligence and a failure to prioritize compliance, which are fundamental responsibilities for any employee in a regulated industry. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of applicable regulations, a comprehensive risk assessment of any proposed business changes, and a commitment to transparent communication with all relevant parties. Employees should be encouraged to seek guidance from legal and compliance departments when uncertainties arise, and to err on the side of caution when it comes to regulatory adherence and ethical conduct. Question 18. Cost-benefit analysis shows that launching a new food additive developed by Ajinomoto could significantly increase market share and profitability. However, preliminary internal research suggests a small but statistically significant possibility of adverse health effects in a specific demographic if consumed in very high quantities. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for Ajinomoto to take? Option A. Halt the product launch until further extensive, independent, and long-term studies can definitively rule out any adverse health effects, even if this significantly delays market entry and reduces potential profits. Option B. Launch the product with detailed scientific information about the potential risks available only upon request from regulatory bodies or healthcare professionals, emphasizing the additive's proven benefits in mainstream advertising. Option C. Proceed with the launch, assuming that the low probability of adverse effects means it is unlikely to be a significant issue, and address any consumer complaints on a case-by-case basis. Option D. Proceed with the launch, but include a general disclaimer on the product packaging about potential side effects, while focusing marketing efforts on the additive's benefits. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the launch, but include a general disclaimer on the product packaging about potential side effects, while focusing marketing efforts on the additive's benefits. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Ajinomoto, as a global food and chemical company, must navigate the complex ethical and regulatory landscape of product development and marketing. Balancing the potential benefits of a new product with its potential risks and ensuring transparency with all stakeholders requires careful judgment. The challenge is amplified by the need to consider the perspectives of diverse stakeholders, including consumers, regulators, employees, and investors, each with their own interests and expectations. The correct approach involves prioritizing consumer safety and regulatory compliance above all else. This means conducting thorough risk assessments, adhering strictly to all applicable food safety regulations, e.g., those set by the Food Standards Agency in the UK or the FDA in the US, depending on the specific jurisdiction of the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test, and ensuring that all marketing claims are substantiated and not misleading. Ethical considerations dictate that Ajinomoto should proactively disclose any potential risks and engage in open communication with regulatory bodies and the public. This aligns with principles of corporate social responsibility and builds long-term trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing short-term profit by downplaying potential risks would be ethically unsound and could lead to severe regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of consumer confidence. This would violate principles of consumer protection and potentially breach regulations requiring accurate product information. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed to market over comprehensive safety testing would similarly expose Ajinomoto to significant legal and ethical liabilities. This disregards the fundamental duty of care owed to consumers and could result in product recalls, lawsuits, and regulatory sanctions. A third incorrect approach that involves withholding or selectively disclosing information about potential risks to investors would be a breach of fiduciary duty and securities regulations, leading to severe legal repercussions and a loss of market credibility. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-stakeholder risk assessment framework. This framework should integrate regulatory requirements, ethical consideration, and the potential impact on all stakeholders. It requires a commitment to transparency, rigorous scientific evaluation, and a proactive approach to risk management, ensuring that consumer well-being and regulatory compliance are paramount in all business decisions. Question 19. During the evaluation of a new AI-powered recruitment platform for Ajinomoto's hiring assessment test, a team identifies that the platform's algorithms may process candidate data in ways not explicitly detailed in the current regulatory framework governing the assessment. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the team to take? Option A. Continue using the AI platform as is, and only address any potential compliance issues if they are raised by candidates or regulatory authorities. Option B. Immediately implement the AI platform, assuming its advanced features are implicitly compliant with the spirit of the regulations. Option C. Proceed with implementing the AI platform while simultaneously initiating a formal inquiry with the relevant regulatory body for clarification on data processing. Option D. Halt the implementation of the AI platform and await a comprehensive review and explicit approval from the regulatory body before any further action. The correct answer is B. Immediately implement the AI platform, assuming its advanced features are implicitly compliant with the spirit of the regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Ajinomoto employees due to the inherent conflict between fostering innovation and ensuring compliance with regulatory frameworks. The need to balance these competing interests requires careful judgment to avoid both stifling creativity and inadvertently breaching established guidelines. The correct approach involves proactively seeking clarification and guidance from the relevant regulatory bodies or internal compliance departments before implementing any new process or technology. This demonstrates a commitment to adhering to the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test's specified regulatory framework. Specifically, it aligns with the principle of due diligence and the ethical obligation to operate within legal boundaries. By engaging with compliance experts, Ajinomoto can ensure that any innovative solutions are not only effective, but also fully compliant, thereby protecting the company from potential legal repercussions and reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the implementation of the new technology without seeking prior approval or clarification. This action fails to uphold the regulatory framework by bypassing established compliance procedures, creates a significant risk of noncompliance, which could lead to penalties, sanctions, or even legal action against Ajinomoto. Another incorrect approach is to assume that the new technology is compliant simply because it is widely used in other industries. This assumption ignores the specific requirements and nuances of the Ajinomoto hiring assessment test's jurisdiction and could result in a violation of its unique regulatory landscape. Finally, delaying the inquiry until after the technology has been implemented is also professionally unsound. This reactive stance suggests a lack of foresight and a disregard for the proactive compliance expected within a regulated environment. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adherence to the regulatory framework. This involves a proactive stance. Identify potential compliance issues early, consult relevant internal and external experts, document all inquiries and decisions, and ensure that any implemented solutions are demonstrably compliant with all applicable laws and guidelines. Question 20. Operational review demonstrates that Ajinomoto's current data processing systems for customer feedback are inefficient and costly. The review proposes streamlining these processes by consolidating data into a single, centralized database and implementing automated analysis tools. However, there is a concern that this consolidation might inadvertently expose sensitive customer information if not managed with strict adherence to data protection principles. Considering Ajinomoto's commitment to responsible business practices, which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations and stakeholder interests? Option A. Focus solely on the cost-saving and efficiency benefits of the proposed changes, as regulatory compliance is a secondary concern that can be managed through general IT security measures. Option B. Proceed with the operational review's recommendations, assuming that existing internal security protocols are sufficient to protect customer data, and defer any specific data protection reviews until after the new system is operational. Option C. Implement the proposed data consolidation and automation immediately to realize efficiency gains, with a plan to address any potential data privacy issues retrospectively if they arise. Option D. Conduct a thorough data privacy impact assessment, DPIA, to identify and mitigate risks associated with the proposed data consolidation and automation, ensuring compliance with all applicable data protection laws before implementation. The correct answer is C. Implement the proposed data consolidation and automation immediately to realize efficiency gains, with a plan to address any potential data privacy issues retrospectively if they arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential conflict between Ajinomoto's internal operational efficiency goals and the regulatory obligations concerning data privacy and security. The need to balance these competing interests requires careful judgment to ensure compliance and maintain stakeholder trust. The correct approach involves prioritizing the regulatory framework, specifically the data protection laws applicable to Ajinomoto's operations, when designing and implementing new data handling processes. This approach is right because it directly addresses the fundamental legal and ethical duty to protect sensitive information. By adhering to these regulations, Ajinomoto safeguards its customers, employees, and business partners from potential data breaches and misuse, thereby upholding its reputation and avoiding significant legal penalties. The regulatory framework mandates specific standards for data collection, storage, processing, and transfer, and any operational decision must align with these requirements. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the operational review's recommendations without a thorough assessment of their compliance with data protection laws. This failure stems from a disregard for legal obligations, potentially exposing Ajinomoto to severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of trust. Another incorrect approach would be to implement the changes based solely on perceived cost savings or efficiency gains, without considering the privacy implications for individuals whose data is involved. This demonstrates a lack of ethical consideration and a failure to recognize the importance of data privacy as a fundamental right and a regulatory imperative. A third incorrect approach would be to assume that existing, but outdated, data handling practices are sufficient, neglecting the dynamic nature of data protection regulations and the evolving threat landscape. This reactive stance is insufficient and fails to meet the proactive requirements of modern data governance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all applicable regulatory requirements. This should be followed by a comprehensive risk assessment of any proposed operational changes, specifically focusing on data privacy and security. The next step is to design solutions that not only meet operational objectives, but also demonstrably comply with all relevant regulations. Finally, ongoing monitoring and periodic reviews are essential to ensure continued adherence to the regulatory framework and to adapt to any changes in laws or best practices.